there's this kind of outdated stereotype of what a conservationist is. It's someone out in the field, they've got boots on, they've got their clipboard and their data and their research, and they have a PhD. Anyone can be a conservationist. And it's really encouraging people to bring their unique skill sets and strengths to the table. We work with artists. I consider them conservationists. They're helping tell the story of the environmental movement. If you're good at numbers, guess what? We need to crunch data. We need finance help. There's a role for pretty much everyone in this movement, and companies need to be thinking of themselves as conservationists too. Governments are not moving fast enough. Market forces can really make a difference. We've seen it in other places. So I encourage everyone to start thinking of themselves as conservationists.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm really pleased to be joined today by Carrie Hutchison from Rewild. And not everyone knows what Rewild is, so why don't we start with you giving us your elevator pitch of what Rewild is and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin, for having me. It's great to be here. So Rewild is a nonprofit organization that protects and restores the wild. So a lot of people think of nature as something to be pitied, rescued, saved. But they don't think of it as the solution to the interconnected crises we're all seeing, right? There's the human health crisis that we saw with the pandemics. There's biodiversity loss and extinction and ecosystems being degraded. And then, of course, there's the big climate change threat that we're all facing these days. So it's not just protecting animals or trees or fungi because we think that they're wonderful, which they are, but it's really the solution to all of those problems that we're facing. So really getting people to think about it differently. Rewild is, I like to call us like the great connector. We're a hub. We connect, nonprofits around the world that are working on the ground with philanthropic resources, with capacity building, with research, with exploration, guidance, et cetera. And we also share all this information with our followers and our audience and our donors. So I'm proud to say we have a global network of 400 partners in more than 80 countries around the world. We're very partner-led. Local organizations, indigenous communities, people on the ground in country know their landscapes, their culture, their species the best. So we work with them to support the work that they're doing to protect the most important places in the world for biodiversity.
That's great. And I'm curious, and maybe you know the answer to this, maybe you don't, but as regards to the naming of the organization. So when I first read it and understood what the mission was, I was thinking about, okay, well, to me, preservation is about like taking where it is now and preserving it. But yet the name actually seemed to almost think like, wait, let's turn back the clock. Let's reintroduce wilderness and wild back into places that had been, industrialized or, a rainforest that had been torn down or whatever. I sort of wondered how much of the focus is on sort of the reintroduction of these native species into their habitats versus the preservation of the ones that are there currently.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me rewind us to 2021. We renamed our organization from Global Wildlife Conservation, which had a focus on wildlife, to Rewild. And one of the reasons is not to get lost in that, I call it the acronym soup of conservation organizations. And to give some energy, I love the word wild. I think it's got a lot of power. It's got pizzazz. I think it's sexy. So we did so to refresh our visual identity, refresh our name, and also attract partners and corporate sponsors that would want to stand next to this really cool organization doing really important work. if you get 10 I like to say, if you get 10 scientists into a room, they're going to give you 10 different definitions of rewilding. So one of the reasons we put the colon in our name is, I like to say, are you more likely to open an email that starts with RE than a window? So it gives it a little bit of punch. It gives it a little bit of a modern feel. But it also gives us a little bit of interpretation around rewilding, right? So yes, rewilding can be restoring a place to its original state, but also the planet's always been in a state of flux to some degree. A lot more so now since industrialization. So to the extent that we focus on all of the things that you mentioned, we do all of those things. So sometimes it is preserving a place. Sometimes we will go into a place that has not been degraded, that is pristine, that needs to stay that way. So that's one of the conservation strategies we employ, is protecting areas from future damage or harm. We also go to places where there's been a lot of degradation. Perhaps it was invasive species that took over an island and ruined all of the native vegetation. Perhaps it was an area where deforestation killed the habitat of an animal that relied on it. So it depends on the place and what is needed. There are several areas where there's unique species not found anywhere else in the world that we really feel strongly about protecting, like the Galapagos and Madagascar. So we are working with groups there to make sure native vegetation is staying intact, that species are protected. We work with groups like in Australia, where they're doing breeding programs, animals that have either gone extinct in the wild or are close to it. So there's breeding programs and then reintroduction programs. So it really depends on the place. We also support people. People are the most important part of conservation, and they're carrying out the important work. So we call them the guardians, right? We're supporting the guardians as well. And sometimes those are individuals, sometimes those are groups of individuals. But we also feel like it's probably one of the most important pieces of the equation. So we also protect the people and support the people that are doing this work.
Great. Thanks for adding the additional color to that. And in particular, the name change and the rebrand. That's useful to know. I became aware of your session at Advertising Week, which of course talks all about branding and all about awareness and marketing. And you did a session called How Nonprofits Can Meaningfully Engage with and compel people to take action. Mm-hmm. So I unfortunately wasn't able to attend the session. So I'd love to hear what the takeaways were, both from yourself, but all the other folks on the panel. Sort of what was the Reader's Digest for that?
Yeah, so we were invited to be part of that panel by the agency that did our visual identity. So it was really fun to be there. I feel like there should be a lot more nonprofit representation at Adweek. I love talking about brands, and I think branding is a really important aspect of nonprofit messaging. So that was a great panel to be part of. It was with Amber Hamilton, who runs a nonprofit in Memphis. It was with Tank Design, who was the agency that did our rebrand. And we had a really great conversation about how do you leverage your brand and also partner to get people to pay attention to your mission. I think the big takeaway there was, and Amber raised this point really clearly, and it's so important to make sure you're protecting your constituents first and foremost. So her organization did a partnership with Hershey, for example, and it was and she supports youth musicians, right? So making sure that you're not exploiting the people that your nonprofit is created to protect and to support. And I talked a bit about some of the brand partnerships that, since we've renamed ourselves to Rewild, we've embarked on. I think the big takeaway is making sure that you're aligned. So we could talk about brands all day long, but behind brands are people, right? And I think it's really important to have really honest conversations about what's important to you and what you bring to the table. And also it can be a lot of fun, leveraging unique skill sets and unique strengths to accomplish something. Now, also, what are you going to accomplish together? It has to be more than clicks and audience building. Ideally, if you're a for-profit brand working with a nonprofit, it should be about helping to advance the mission of what that organization is and really aligning your values to do so. So a couple of the examples that I spoke about at that panel, for example, was we launched a partnership with YSL Beauty last year. And they are working really hard at making their supply chain more sustainable, their packaging. They're looking at all of the things they have control over. But what they wanted to do was take their corporate responsibility a step further. And they came to us with their homework done. They had third-party audits of their footprint, and they spoke the biodiversity language, and they were looking for a scientific partner who could help them invest in the places most important for biodiversity that were also close to where they source ingredients. So it was just a very natural fit from the beginning. And we are helping them employ projects in Madagascar, Indonesia, and Haiti right now. And we just announced a project in Canada where they're not sourcing ingredients, but they're also looking at where they have the most customers. So finding a partner that it can help you accomplish your goal, but it's also helping them accomplish theirs.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, content is obviously super powerful in that, and storytelling is part of that, and the brands can go along for the ride with storytelling. So do you feel like the nonprofit brand partnerships are missing opportunities to use the content effectively when like sometimes they'll like set it and forget it, and they'll so miss content co-creation opportunities or partnership opportunities?
Yeah, there's so much content right now. And content marketing has taken so many different avenues and forms. I think when approaching content, what we really try to do, and what I work so closely with my team on, is, is it worth creating this content, and who's it for? I think that the environmental story is all over, but how can we bring a fresh perspective to it? How can we bring a unique message? I love unexpected partnerships and unexpected perspectives. So one of the things with YSL Beauty was bringing the story of biodiversity to the millions of customers that they have around the world, showcasing not just the beauty of a place, but the importance of it. So we've just kicked off this partnership. I'm proud of the content that we have provided so far. And we'll be working on a goal of protecting and restoring 100,000 hectares by 2030 with them. So it's not just creating content for content's sake, but what kind of unique messages can you bring, or messages that may, in the conservation space, we talk about certain things all the time, but the rest of the world may not really understand it. And maybe it hasn't been presented in the right way or made personal enough to them. I'm also realizing that since the pandemic, forced everything online, that there's a real hunger for offline events now. And my colleague Mary Brown and I went to a YSL Beauty event, and we got to meet with influencers and see where they're sourcing ingredients, and being in person and telling that story is really powerful too. So like going to Ad Week, it was nice to be around people. So I think, content is something we're always going to be creating, making sure that you're using the limited bandwidth for the best and most important content is really important. But I'm also really looking at in-person events a lot more to get the message out. I just think that there's a lot of power in being together in person.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a hunger and a desire for in-person events, and we'll have to see how those take form and if they remain somewhat hybrid as well. I've certainly been out at many more events recently, sort of returning to the new normal and seeing how that looks. And kudos for that partnership and for the role that you guys played in that. Because I'm a huge fan of both cause marketing and CSR, and the fact that the brands can bring so much to the table, not just from the perspective of changing what they do and how they do it. But when they are proud of it, they can put their muscle behind it, and that's both earned media muscle and sometimes paid media muscle, right? So to the extent that the nonprofits that they partner with benefit, sort of get to come along for the ride, right? Beyond the mission-based work that gets done, often they get to sort of piggyback on corporate communications, whether it's paid media or earned media. And I think that a lot of nonprofits can learn a lot from those types of partnerships and take more advantage there.
I think also finding the right partners who are content experts in a specific area. So right after we launched the new brand in May 2021, we announced a partnership with Snapchat, and they invested $1 million in a reforestation project in Southern California. But they took it a step further. They are experts at reaching 13 to 24-year-olds. And we have a lot of knowledge about rewilding and environmental issues. So we combined forces with all our connections and our expertise, and they helped us. They created a show, an original content series for Snapchat called Planet Rewild. So that was a great partnership because we were there to make sure it was scientifically based and that they had the best experts to interview and feature and storylines, but they knew how to package it in a way that was appealing to their specific audience.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure a lot of those audience members had not been exposed to either your old brand or your new one. Right. And so this is a great opportunity for you to grow your brand. Yeah. I did notice you also did a webinar with the ASBN, which included avocado green brands. And I'm curious how that topic and what you covered on that webinar was different than the stuff you did at Advertising Week.
Yeah, so slightly different. That was a panel with avocado and with 1% for the planet. And that was for brands that are looking to partner with nonprofits and kind of what's the best way to go about that. And it featured avocado and Rewild as a brand and nonprofit partnership that we both felt had been really successful and actually, again, really fun. That was it was for brands to understand, what steps can I take? How do I get started? And also, how do I prevent, accusations of greenwashing? Yeah. So especially younger consumers, but I think everyone is a lot more savvy now about, claims of being sustainable. So being sure that you're working with someone who's reputable, how do I go about that? 1% for the Planet is an amazing resource for companies who are either starting on this journey or already on this journey. They do a lot of hand-holding, coaching. They have systems that they can help you set up, but they also serve as a matchmaker. They vet all of the nonprofits in their portfolio, and then they help you as a company select and work with the right partners. And that's how we met Avocado, is through the 1% program. And it was just, again, like a really good fit from the beginning. Our values are very aligned. They were wonderful to work with. And we just also really like their team as people. We've all gotten together for Zoom happy hours and had wonderful chats, and I feel like have become friends, which is even nicer. Added bonus to be friends with people you work with. And we did a lot of content creation together, and they have a beautiful online magazine. And they wrote different pieces about some of the work that we're doing, and they had an artist design some original illustrations for it. And so if you're not familiar with 1%, it was it's been around for decades now, but it's a commitment to donate 1% of your profits to the environmental movement. A minimum of 1%.
Yes. Yep, I'm familiar with it, but maybe a bunch of the folks listening are not. So it's great for you to point brands in the right direction with regards to if they're looking for partnerships and need to sort of know where to start. That's a great place to start. And I love the fact that you re-emphasize the authenticity of the fit, right? And that greenwashing is a thing, right? And you can sort of, it needs to not just pass the sniff test, but it really needs to pass the authenticity test. It's not just a checkbox that a brand should be able to put down, like, oh yeah, I did my thing.
Right. And also all of the nonprofits that 1% works with it's invitation only, I believe. And so they do a lot of vetting for the companies, because if you're just starting on this journey, you might not know the right questions to ask. So making sure that you're working with really solid nonprofits that are reporting their metrics, that are audited, that are efficient, and using donor dollars wisely is really important too. So they're a really great resource for any company that, and I think all companies should be doing 1%. They should be doing 50%. But I'm biased.
Yeah, the planet could use the help, right? So 1% is not going to cut it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really urgent issue. And I think the most innovative and forward-facing companies realize like they need to be part of the solution. I think all companies should think of themselves as conservationists. And that's something that we want to do with our brand as well, is, there's this kind of outdated stereotype of what a conservationist is. It's someone out in the field, they've got boots on, they've got their clipboard and their data and their research, and they have a PhD. Anyone can be a conservationist. And it's really encouraging people to bring their unique skill sets and strengths to the table. We work with artists. I consider them conservationists. They're helping tell the story of the environmental movement. If you're good at numbers, guess what? We need to crunch data. We need finance help. There's a role for pretty much everyone in this movement, and companies need to be thinking of themselves as conservationists too. Governments are not moving fast enough. Market forces can really make a difference. We've seen it in other places. So I encourage everyone to start thinking of themselves as conservationists, and 1% is a really great place to start.
So one thing I noticed you guys were doing as a brand, which I don't see enough nonprofits doing, is partnering with other nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's not enough of that going on. So I'd love you to comment on that.
Yeah. Like I said, the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, human health, it's urgent. It's going to take all of us. So I like to call it co-opetition. We work with a lot of, major, large, global environmental nonprofits. We also work with small ones. And again, I think each organization tends to have their own strengths to bring to the table. And it's not about who could get there first. It's about how do we get there. So I think that's kind of been our model from the beginning. Even though we renamed ourselves in 2021, we've been around a lot longer. And that was always part of the model, is finding the best organization or person to carry out the activity at hand. And we love working with partners. I spend probably 90% of my calls on partners of some kind, whether they are philanthropic partners, corporate partners, or program partners. And also a lot of the conservation partners that we work with don't have big platforms. They don't have access to influencers. So they really rely on us to help tell their story and to share what they're doing with the world and why it's urgent and why it's important. So I don't know, I think it's been a wonderful experience to work with partners. It's something that is pretty core to our DNA and has been from the very start. I would also love to explore working with nonprofits that are outside of our conservation sphere, and have had some initial conversations with groups. Again, it's kind of an unexpected partnership to bring forward sometimes, that makes a huge difference, moves the needle. And like the environmental movement is not unconnected to other efforts, right? It's a social justice issue. There's environmental racism happening that we need to address and reveal and fix. It's a health issue. It's a water access issue. I mean, it just touches so many different areas that it can also feel very overwhelming. And that's another thing that I really want our brand to accomplish, is for people to, I know we're all tired and we have something called hope fatigue, right? But to feel like there is something that they can do. And that's something that we heard from our followers. I always read our comments on Instagram and read the messages coming into our general inbox. People are feeling a bit like, what can I do about this very giant thing? So we've also created content for people that are individuals. So they can't go to Madagascar necessarily and plant trees, but can they replace some of the invasive species growing in their yard with native plants? Yeah. Can they eat less or no meat? Yeah. So we developed a guide on our website called Rewild Your Life. Again, to try to encourage everybody to feel like there is something that they can do.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. One thing I hear from brands, in some cases, as in businesses, as well as from nonprofits, looking to forge relationships with those brands, is there's sort of like the acronym confusion and not knowing sort of where the boundaries are, right? So if for a nonprofit, for example, they might think about the brand partnerships as sponsorships, right? Or they may think about it as CSR, or they may think about it as cause marketing. And sometimes at the brand, those are different departments, right? And so they can't decide sort of, well, who do I talk to first? Or do I talk to, like, do I just start from the top and let them decide who do I talk to? So do you have any thoughts to share on sort of what's worked for you? Because you've done some pretty, inclusive relationships with the brand partners where you're helping them change what they're doing, right? And how they're running their businesses to have impact, but you're also taking advantage of potentially some CSR and cause marketing elements of the relationship as well.
Mm-hmm. And I would say I probably work with people at companies in all of those departments. So, right. And every company structures it a bit differently. I think the best scenario is making sure the company that you're talking to, that those departments are talking to each other. And again, that comes back to expectations. I would also say if you feel like you're not speaking the same language in an initial conversation with a nonprofit, then maybe it's not the right fit. Mm-hmm. And it may be that you have to do some more homework on your side, or you might have to find a different partner. Most nonprofits don't have the reach or the advertising budgets that you may have as a for-profit organization. So if you're looking to grow your audience or create some sort of halo effect, and that's your only motivation, might not be the right way to go about it. But often we are talking to CSR departments that have done all of their research about what UN SDGs they want, UN Sustainable Development Goals they want to align with, and looked at external parties to do a look at their footprint, for example. So it really comes back to what you want to accomplish and why, and what's your motivation, and making sure that you're coming in being very clear about that. And if the nonprofit you're talking to has slightly different goals, or there's a level of discomfort, or they don't think that they can meet those expectations, it's always better not to force it. It's a waste of time and effort, and often money on everyone's part.
That's a great point. Now, the brands and the nonprofits obviously benefit most when the consumer takes the action, and there are micro actions, right? Like maybe having one less hamburger a week, and there are bigger actions. So when you start to message around that, how do you decide how big of an action to request of the consumer, or do you let them sort of cherry pick whatever's right for them?
I make sure to be very clear with this is just from Rewild's perspective, with our for-profit partners, that we're not selling product for them. That's just not a role that we can take on. It's not our expertise, and it's not aligned with our mission. It would distract from it. We're happy for them to support our work and talk about the support for our work, but we can't be a sales arm for them. And maybe there are some nonprofits that have that reach and are willing to take on that role. But we've just found it's just not the right fit for us. So being very clear about what you can do and can't do. The best partnerships for us is really that the companies are making this investment and not asking their customers to do so. There may be an element of encouraging their customers to take an action, but we've found it's best if the company itself is investing directly. They want to provide funding for a specific project or for a kind of project or an effort. And then we do some co-marketing around the storytelling around that. But that's just the model that works best for us. I know that there's been a lot of different ways that these can go about. Sometimes people do, like, for every widget you buy, we'll donate a percentage of proceeds. That sometimes works out. And I think that, again, it's a bit risky. It's hard for the nonprofit to know what they will get in the end, and they could be putting in a lot of time and effort around the storytelling, and in the end not really get what they need in terms of resources to carry out their work. So we've just found it's best when the company is directly investing, and maybe they're asking for customers to do something on top of that. But that's just been the most advantageous and clear and focused arrangements for us.
Yeah, I was less thinking about asking the consumer to make purchase or donation behavior, but more behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, join us in saving the planet, basically.
Absolutely. That's where I think that companies can really bring strength to the conservation movement. We don't have the advertising budgets. We don't have the access to all the great agencies and advertising minds. Sometimes we do, but in terms of, spend, that's where companies, they have captured the interest, the hearts, the minds of their fans and those who follow them and buy their products, and kind of believe in them and identify with their brands. So I think that's where it's been really wonderful. Like YSL Beauty is a great example. They have millions of followers around the world. They look to them to set the trends. And if you want to make saving the planet trendy, I am all in.
So yeah, do you have any things coming up in the next year in 2023, now that we're kicking off a new year, that you're super excited about, either, personally or professionally, or just ecosystem changes that you think are really positive?
Yeah. Biodiversity is finally getting into media a lot more. I feel like there's been a misunderstanding about why biodiversity is important, and it's getting a lot more media coverage. It needs to get a lot more. We have a wonderful communications team that has deep relationships with environmental reporters. We need more of those reporters to be biodiversity focused, and we need more of them. So I'm excited that that team is going to be moving forward on encouraging those efforts and helping journalists understand the issues better and helping them tell those stories. So that's just something that I'm noticing more coverage around, and I'm excited about that. The word rewilding is getting a lot more attention too, and buzz, and that's great. Not just for our brand, but for the bigger effort of what we're trying to do. One of the best, most effective things an individual can do for the planet is to have a plant-based diet, to eat a lot more plants and a lot less meat and dairy. And the reason for that is because of all of the habitat destruction that's taking place for agriculture, big ag, and mostly raising animals or growing food to feed the animals that people eat. So we are gearing up for a campaign called Rewild Your Fridge. I'm very excited about that. I think it'll provide some really fun opportunities for corporate partners to participate and influencers. And it's not going to be preachy. I think we need to approach this in a unique way, but also really get people to understand that what you have in your fridge has everything to do with a rainforest disappearing or habitat loss or extinction of key species. So I'm really excited for that. We just got some philanthropic funding for it. We've been planning it for a while. We have really cool creative. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about this year.
That is super exciting. So if a brand or an influencer wants to reach out and help out, how should they do that?
Oh, they should definitely contact me. I am on LinkedIn. You can also send a note to hello@rewild.org, and it'll get to me. Follow us on social. We're at Rewild across all the platforms. But yeah, I'd love to chat.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me. It was great to learn about what you're up to and what you have planned.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.